You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here as we spin tales about the news. And as we do when we're on Han Solo Mondays, I've got a few programming notes, including future guests on the show. This week, Elias Valencia and Victor Vidalis from Phoenix will be having a one-to-one conversation about the South Central TOD Community Plan, which we produced in partnership with Rail Evolution. And this week, also on Thursday, I'll be chatting with Alexandra Lang about her new book discussing the history of the mall, which is going to be pretty fun. And soon we'll be chatting with Paris Marks as well about his new book on technology and transportation. So stay tuned for those episodes, and I'm working on some really, really good ones in addition to those as well. So, and not to mention that 400th episode is coming up soon. So we just finished 392, I think, with Michael Newman. And so 8 more episodes, and we're at 400. I can't believe it. And then add that to 114 episodes of this Monday show, and we're already over 500 episodes of podcasts in the Talking Headways Podcast Network, which is really cool. It's a lot of podcasts, a lot of time, and I thank you all for listening as we go through all that. Also, we got our scarves. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, as we do when we do the little advertising bit for Patreon at the middle of the show. But we got the lightweight bike scarves in, and I've sent them out to a few folks who have ordered them already. You can go to theoverheadwire.com to order them, and then pre-order the knit scarves, because those are coming soon too. I just got a tracking number for those today. So the knit bike only and the knit bus only are going to be here soon as well. So for those who like to wear their scarves in winter, those will be coming. And then also we have the lightweight ones for those who live in warmer climes, which they are really lightweight. I'm really impressed with how they came out, and the really cool checkerboard. Now the checkerboard scarves, I only ordered about 50 of those. The lightweight ones. So get your hands on them quick if you want to get one, because those will probably sell out faster as I have more of the other two. So hopefully folks can get their hands on those scarves. I think they're really cool. And as you hear from our shows lately, we've been covering a lot of books, and you might have heard Michael Newman's episode last week. And that was a really great discussion, and the book was mind-blowing to me, actually. I mean, maybe not as mind-blowing as, say, Carol Martin's book about accessibility, but it was a really great discussion and episode, as well as a book. I found myself reading the book and being like, this book isn't as advertised. I feel like it has a lot more to say in the book than maybe the cover portrays. And I told Michael, actually, or I didn't tell him, I should have told him, that I think the cover, which is just it's like a road in England with some some windmills, some new windmills, not like the old Dutch ones. And I should have told him I thought the cover needed a little bit better representation of really the planning book that's in this discussion. So it was really cool. It was a really good book. And I wanted to say so much more about the book that I didn't get a chance to, because we still cover about 50 minutes or so. We did cover the trees part of the book, but the sustainability of these organisms compared with cities was a really great discussion and a really great part of the book that I don't think gets enough discussion. And I guess, as Michael said during the episode, these organisms are millions of years old. They've learned to be sustainable. They've learned to trap water when they need to, and help each other through their root systems. But cities are only about 10,000 years old, 10 to 5,000 years old. And so we really aren't, we're very wasteful with how we build cities, how we go about producing things, how we connect with each other. We're pretty wasteful. So it's interesting to compare like old systems that have been built up through evolution and cities which have not been built up through evolution. We've learned a lot, but it's not quite the same and not quite as sustainable, but we can learn a lot from them. And also the framing around infrastructure really got to me too. I think that what we should be thinking of is something that's a common good that everybody can use, but our society really wants to talk about roads and rails and bridges as assets to be sold and bought. And I think it's like housing or healthcare. We need to get away from the commodification of certain goods That should be basic amenities everyone can afford rather than complicated assets that people stake their whole retirements on. So that's another thing that I think came from the book and that we discussed briefly. But anyways, it was a really great discussion. It was a really great book. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about it because I just feel like it was really good. And, all of our discussions are really fun and really good. So if you listen to the Talking Headways podcast, you know that I have a lot of fun asking questions and I have a lot of really good guests on the show. And most of the time, almost all the time, they're guests that I invite because I'm interested in the subject. And we do, unfortunately, we do have to turn some folks away because the subject matter just doesn't fit with what we want to talk about. But when you get an episode from us on Talking Headways, it's usually going to be a good one. So, but as I mentioned, related to books, I went on a tangent there for a second, but you can get actually Michael's book on our bookshop.org page because we're a bookshop.org affiliate. And this means that if you buy the book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Yeah, and we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on the show, as well as interviewing them, as well as us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. We really appreciate it. All the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are in the shop. And thanks to everyone who has bought books through the shop. It's been really great to see what books you guys are interested in. Right now, it seems like Bike Lanes Are White Lanes by Melody Hoffman, who we interviewed at the APA Midwest Conference a few years ago, is the most popular book so far. That's people have ordered multiple times. So, So get any of the books from the authors that we've talked with on the show. You can go to bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. That's bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. And we get a small amount of the purchase. But and you all get the whole purchase, get the book, which is really great because a lot of these books, especially Michael's last week, I really do recommend it highly. Sustainable Infrastructure for Cities and Societies. You can get that on our bookshop page. Okay, this is episode 114. We are in session. And before we get to the show, I want to let folks know, as we always do, they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts if it's working. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire, this show you're listening to right now, and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. And thank you so much to everybody who subscribes through podcatchers. It's great that you guys keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. I'm not a huge advertiser. I throw we put this up on LinkedIn. We put this up on Twitter. We put it up on some of the pages where we release stuff. And I'm just, I like to do the work, and sometimes some of the advertising and some of that gets out of it. So everybody who's on a podcatcher who just comes back every week, we really appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. Okay, let's get to the news. So, as you know, if you listen to the Monday show, these are stories that piqued our interest from our newsletter, which is, if you go to theoverheadwire.com and you can sign up for a 2-week free trial of the newsletter. This is what most of my work is. We put together a newsletter for professionals, and we find really interesting articles and interesting news, and then we sometimes talk to them on the podcast, and sometimes we talk about those stories here on the Monday show. And so let's get into it. Charlotte's dropping transit ridership. Using the National Transit Database, Steve Harrison took a look at Charlotte's declining transit ridership and found that buses had lost 75% of riders in the last 10 years. There are many potential reasons for the drop, including neighborhood displacement, more people owning cars, and the rise of ride-hailing services. That was by Steve Harrison at WFAE in Charlotte. Steve actually used to write for the Charlotte Observer as well. He's a really good urban affairs writer, which is great. So I think the 75% number isn't accurate for 2014, and because it also includes all the pandemic losses. And I know it's kind of not, it's the truth that the pandemic is included in our life and things are happening, but it doesn't it just has messed up society and life so much that I really hate to kind of have these comparisons sometimes without doing a before and an after of the pandemic and what was going on before the pandemic happened and what was going on after. Now, 75% is a huge drop, but so is the number that was actually before that in 2019. So if you look at the numbers that Steve provided, they went from 23.9 million riders in 2014 to 15.6 million in 2019, and then to 5.9 million riders in 2021 for the bus. And so, I'm not good at percent change math, and, X minus X divided by X equals the percentage times 100 or whatever. But, it's about 50% or so to 2019. And then, basically another huge amount from 2019 to 2021. So, that's really frustrating to hear that the bus network has been reduced in ridership that much. And I think there's a lot of explanations for it. There's a lot of explanations. Part of it's the pandemic, but it was happening before the pandemic. And I think, Charlotte's a really fast growing city. I'll note also that this is for bus ridership. The rail ridership actually kept the ridership up for the whole system a little bit, as it was only a 65% drop or so, rather than just the total 75%. But and then that might point to some of the riders actually, switching from the bus to the rails, which Charlotte has a pretty popular blue line that goes through the center of town, but it's also a very work-serving line going into uptown, which is what they call their downtown. And those types of things. So it's really frustrating to see that these numbers are dropping. And I think these numbers are dropping for a lot of systems around the country and really, really haven't recovered. And I know Charlotte has a plan for that. They're going to maybe try to pass a transit tax. But there's all kinds of reasons for this. I mean, there's driver vacancies, which has been a big problem. Transit Center just had a big report about drivers. There's also displacement in neighborhoods that are in the core of cities that's happening. And I think this is a major driver of transit ridership decline, is that as cities have become super popular among the more wealthy, then more ridership is displaced. More people that would actually ride the bus are displaced. And so the people that move into the center cities, they live in their apartments with their parking spaces and they drive more. But the people that often depend on transit, because of these systems are set up for mostly transit-dependent riders, they are the ones that suffer the most when people move in and push them out. And I think this is happening all over the country. So that's something that we really should think about and read up on, to see how the change in income levels and the change in folks living in these neighborhoods has happened. Because it is, I think, one of the bigger stories that doesn't get reported on a ton. There's a little bit of discussion about it, but we don't have like the huge amount of research background to look at what was happening even before the pandemic. And so, like I said, there's a new discussion of a transit tax back in 2007 when they passed another tax to build the light rail line, but also to increase their bus ridership. They actually increased ridership by 100% because they invested in service. And I think that that's a lesson that they should take from that era, because a lot of agencies aren't really understanding that. They are cutting service for whatever reason and expecting people to ride, but you're not going to ride a bus if you're not sure it's ever going to come. And I think that's part of the story as well. This story by Steve Harrison is that, there's a lot of folks he interviewed who were like, well, the bus might come and it may not come. And I can imagine that's why you'd lose ridership to about 75%, the tune of 75%, because you're just really not, getting people where they are. And so that's a frustrating part as well. So I think transit agencies really need to come back with the full service. They need to bring back riders that way. And I know that they're hedging on, because they're thinking about a fiscal cliff. New York MTA just came out the other day saying that their ridership isn't as much as projected, and they're worried that there's going to be even more of a loss. And they have pandemic funding now, but eventually there's going to be a problem with some sort of a crash because of it. So I'm interested to see what happens. I know that that's happening in a lot of places in San Francisco as well. Although a lot of lines in San Francisco are actually above pre-pandemic levels, the lines that go actually between neighborhoods and to places where people are going, rather than just going downtown to the office. So that's another thing that I think a lot of lines around the country, or I guess transit agencies around the country should focus on too, is focusing on those lines that a lot of people use and connections that a lot of people use, because I think that'll bring your ridership back. But you can't do it until you have to get funding. I guess for Charlotte's going to be that 1 cent sales tax. If they actually go to the ballot, they might not even go to the ballot. Who knows? They've been fighting over it, but we'll see going forward. Okay, next up, Oregonians. Oregonians once feared sprawl, then did something about it. The Willamette Valley in Oregon is home to an amazing amount of agricultural abundance, only second in the United States to California in terms of the breadth of produce grown. But the valley was once under threat from urban sprawl, pollution, and unchecked growth, leading to a state land use system that Oregon is well known for around the country. This was by Jeff Mapes in Oregon Public Broadcasting. I don't know if it's Mapes, it's M-A-P-E-S. Sometimes I don't know how to pronounce people's names, and I apologize because I wish I did. But Jeff has a really great series on OPB about the history of some of Oregon's growth management plans. It was fun to go back in time and understand what was happening that made people worry so much about sprawl. I think here in the Bay Area specifically, as it mentions in this article, we lost something that from the Bay Area when a lot of the orchards and farmlands were displaced by housing. A lot of it is mindless sprawl, and it doesn't really add much to the landscape. There's actually, a really good book by Jonathan Levine called Zoned Out, which discusses that in great detail, talking about how much of Silicon Valley actually used to be orchards, and why we have this really weird land use system, which is only single family houses in a lot of the areas where we plowed over farmland and orchards. So there's a lot of fertile ground in these places where houses are, and Oregon didn't want to do that. So I thought there's a thought that it would only make a difference if we allowed denser housing, if we kept all this farmland. But a lot of people complain that Oregon's urban growth boundaries, in that they're just sprawling inside of the growth boundaries. So there's that problem that might happen as well. And then we might even have a worse housing problem than we do already. But I think we would have seen more dense housing if you would have protected some of that farmland. Maybe like watching the Tour de France last week, it would be amazing if we followed that type of town and agricultural history lesson. There's so many places outside of the periphery where there's a farm and there's a house and there's lots of farmland, and then inside the towns there's a really dense built up area which is really walkable. It has really great neighborhoods, a lot of small towns. It's really interesting to see some of those places and what they are in older places like Europe, and I'm sure in Asia and other parts of the world as well. So this is the first part of a series about Oregon's plan and movement towards that growth management system, and how they protected farmers from the ultimate sprawl. And it's a series, so we'll link to this specific article in the show notes. But I know that there's been an article or two that have come out after that with more details on that history. So check it out if you get a chance. I know everybody talks about Oregon. I know a lot of Oregonians, specifically in Portland, they want to dissuade you from thinking that it's perfect, which is true, but there's a lot of good things to learn from it as well. Okay, Hoboken shows the way on Vision Zero. Hoboken is setting up to be a national model for how to get zero traffic deaths. The city has already had 0 deaths in the last 4 years, and it continues to be aggressive by moving from 25 to 20 miles per hour on local roads to curb collisions. This was by our friend Kia Wilson at Streetsblog USA. Hoboken is serious about this, and it really shows. I mean, 20 is plenty on residential streets, and hopefully it cuts down on collisions, which I think it will, because they are focused on infrastructure changes rather than just posting signs. And as Kia notes in the article, Hoboken has the fourth highest population density of any city in the United States, which allows for more walking and biking, and it allows it to focus on solutions like corner daylighting and curb extensions. And if you don't know what a corner daylight is, it means basically you're not allowed to park a car on the corner of a street so that you can actually see around the corner, see if cars are coming, see if cars are going too fast around the corner. And then curb extensions too. I mean, these are something that I've seen a lot in San Francisco with actually some of the bus stops in at least in Noe Valley. They've extended the curbs and actually made it really more pleasurable to ride the bus in that way. And so I think that curb extensions that allow people to have a shorter distance between one side of the street and the other, those are really beneficial too, because again, you can see where people coming. You have a shorter amount of time that it takes to cross a street. You don't have to worry about crossing a huge road, which I think is part of the problem, and it actually makes things safer. So those are the things that they're doing in Hoboken, and I really hope that more towns kind of learn from this and take Vision Zero a little bit seriously rather than paying it like lip service like they always do. I mean, there's countries like Wales who are now 20 miles per hour for the whole country in urbanized areas, which makes total sense. We know that when you go below 30, 25, 20, 15 miles per hour, what happens when you get hit by a car is much less damage. Now, I think I saw a tweet by Beth Osborne maybe yesterday or the day before saying that those numbers are actually changing because of the size of vehicles in the United States. So if you're hit by a 1-ton vehicle versus a 3-ton vehicle, I think the damage on your body is even worse. So if you're 20 miles an hour in a 3-ton, it might be worth it to cut down the miles per hour on residential streets even more. Or we could just regulate vehicles so that they're not so huge and hulking. I think that's probably the way to go, actually, and then you can change it. You don't have to change the infrastructure necessarily. But, another thing that they do in Hoboken, which I found was interesting, is that they've really focused on that, that physical infrastructure that will make people slow down rather than just posting signs. And I think that's a big part of it too, in that, if you're trying to get people to slow down, their line of sight and their vision needs to see some obstacles in the way so that they actually physically decide to slow down rather than just see a sign and then the road is designed for 40 miles an hour. I think that's one of the bigger things that can be done. Here on my street in San Francisco, it's pretty narrow, and I think people get annoyed with that. But at the same time, it keeps people going, slow most of the time. There's still crazy people that speed through, and I think that's going to happen anywhere, just because there are a lot of crazy people and a little, they have their foot on the pedal. But for the most part, people drive through here pretty slow, and I think it's because of the narrow street, which was built in the 1880s, maybe even a little bit earlier, 1875 or so. So, those are the things that I think we can learn from, and especially this example at Hoboken, where they've actually had 0 deaths in the last 4 years, and I hope it continues because they're setting a really good example. Okay. How cities can better prepare against brutal heat waves. As temperatures across the globe reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, cities are acutely positioned to create heat stress for residents. Buildings and pavement often trap heat, making it hard to get cool at night, but there are solutions including greening streetscapes, providing more public drinking fountains and amenities, while also creating safe, cool spaces where people can be when the temperature is hot. And this is by Heitor Hernandez Morales at Politico EU. Heitor has been writing some really good articles lately, so I highly recommend going to the link here and then clicking on his name and checking out some of the stuff he's been writing about European cities. It's been really great to read his stuff. So this is also where I go back to my discussion last week about Michael Newman. He talked about Iran's qanats, which are underground aqueducts that bring water into cities, which are greened even if it's super hot outside. And, that temperature difference between green and gray spaces is really huge and something cities need to work on, I think, extensively. It would be much easier to do green infrastructure also if there weren't as much sprawl, but this is kind of where we're at. So there's lessons to be learned from places all around the world who lived with this for a long time. There was an article the other week about mud houses too, where places in that have adapted over thousands of years to living in heated areas. The mud actually is really good because it keeps the houses cool and its basic temperature in the daytime, and it keeps them warm at night when actually the temperature drops pretty precipitously. And so, there's something to be said about designing with nature and also designing with historical knowledge that we've kind of lost over time. We build these kind of cookie cutter, candy cutter houses, and what happens is we lose that knowledge of local standards and what people have learned to do in order to live with the environment that they're in. So really interesting discussion about, heat and what's going on in these countries around the world. Last week, Europe and the US saw a pretty brutal heat wave reaching, like I said, 40 degrees C in England for the first time ever at Heathrow. And, if someone says that's a fluke, they really aren't paying attention or are really flat out lying. So there's a lot of stuff we can do in cities to keep cool, opening pools, making sure places are open for people to cool down. The worst part about heat is not during the daytime necessarily. It's actually at night because your body really needs to cool down to reduce the heat stress. So, what happens is people actually, when they actually are afflicted by heat stroke or other things, a lot of what happens is they pull in that heat during the day and then it can't dissipate at night. And that's part of the problem is those nighttime temperatures too. So we need to really figure out how to make that work to where people are safe. And I think there's another heat wave coming at some point here soon in the future. And I hope, we start planning more in depth for that future. Okay, final one. So, administration floats emissions rules. The U.S. Department of Transportation has announced a proposed rule that would require state DOTs and MPOs to measure emissions from transportation. They must have targets that decline from 2021 and reach zero by 2050, a goal of the current administration. Progress reports will be expected every 2 years, and Republican senators such as Shelley Moore Capito are not happy about it. So this was by Dan Zukowski and Smart Cities Dive. Like I said, the emissions targets must decline from a 21 baseline and must align with the administration's goal of a net zero emission by 2050. I personally think 2050 seems really far away. It's 30 years from now. Imagine where we were 30 years ago from here. It was like 1990. That seems like a really, really long time away, and there's a lot of natural disasters that happen in 30 years. So, I really wish we would get on our butts and start actually taking this seriously, really addressing it. We could actually do it if we wanted to, but the politics of it is messy because of, deniers and things like that. But This is something we could do faster. But anyways, I'm glad we have a goal, but I wish the goal was sooner. So the new rule would take 2 important steps to combat climate change. This is from the US DOT website. Establish a national framework for tracking state-by-state progress by adding a new greenhouse gas performance management measure to the existing Federal Highway Administration national performance measures to help states track performance and make more informed investment decisions. And number 2, create a flexible system under which state DOTs and MPOs would set their own declining targets for on-road greenhouse gas emissions from roadway travel on the national highway system. So basically, they want them to set targets. And some folks are not happy about this. They say this isn't what the Senate, passed when these 10 old senators got together to do an infrastructure bill that doesn't make sense for people who are under, the age of 70. They will just want more cars, more roads, and it's unfortunate and frustrating. But we need to track these things. We need to figure out how much emissions we're emitting. There's so much to be learned from just taking the data and learning what actually is happening in terms of emissions. You can't actually do anything if you don't know what's happening. So it makes a lot of sense to actually do this. And I think that people have been clamoring for this for a long time. We've been waiting for this forever. We need goals. We need to try to meet goals. Otherwise, we're just sitting around and giving out monies to DOTs to build more roads. There was an article today, and I can't remember the name of the publication, but it was like Global Times or something along those lines. And it was, a reporter from Shanghai. And what she was writing was that, China is trying actually to expand their interstate highway, the local interstate highway. I'm not sure exactly what they call it, but the highway system that they've built a lot of, but they haven't actually filled out. On a per capita basis, they have a lot less than the United States. But it's interesting the way that they talk about it. They talk about being scientific about where they're investing and whether that investment is actually going to be beneficial over time and how that's going to reach goals that they have for the country and things like that. And now I'm not saying that, we should compare, one-to-one in terms of what China and what the United States are doing, because obviously they're catching up from a long time where they weren't investing. But at the same time, that scientific investment is actually going to pay dividends in the end, because they're going to focus on what needs are there and not just, one of the things I've been complaining about forever is just the handing out of money just to do whatever a state DOT wants. And that's not really how it should work, I don't think, in this era, especially during climate change. So anyways, the administration, laid out some programs too, where in the infrastructure bill that could be used towards this end, for reducing emissions and also for setting targets. And, the Formula Fund Carbon Reduction Program, the Congestion Relief Program, the Charging and Fueling Program, the Port Facility Truck Emissions Program. There's also a TOD program. And there's already 24 states where laws require this type of tracking. So I don't think this will be any different from that. And, the other 26 states are really annoyed about this, and they're just the stragglers that don't want to acknowledge that climate change is real and it's already here. I know that's the case, and I wish they would, because things are happening. So we got to get going on that. So, anyways, I think this is interesting. I think a lot of people were praising this because they were frustrated by some of the climate measures that the administration has been taking lately, and also the Supreme Court case on the EPA and the power plan and all that stuff. But, this is actually a good way forward. So I'm really happy about this. I'm really excited that we're actually going to start having this discussion. Whether it happens or not is another thing. I hope that DOT can move forward, but we'll see. Okay. So this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we had somebody sign up 2 days ago, which is great. And we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month and gets you some stickers, and $10 a month gets you our bus only or bike only scarf. So I have pre-order forms up for the bus only and the bike only knit scarves. But we have actually the lightweight scarves in, like I said at the beginning of the show, we have them in stock. We have about 50 of them. So if folks want to order, then go for it. If you want to become a Patreon, when you do become a Patreon, send me an email and let me know which one you want, and we can send them to you. The knit ones are going to come soon. I have the tracking numbers, as I said, so I'm really excited about that. Check out theoverheadwire.com. On the top of the page, you can actually click and purchase the scarves. But also, we love when you're Patreon members because that's really sustaining for us. The $10 a month actually helps. And like I said last week, not last week, but last time we had Sophia on, basically pays for her to do some editing for the podcast. So when you do support the show, you really are supporting, us doing this work, because it is really, it's really fun. It's really interesting. And I'm glad to share with all the stuff that we learn with you all. But we also, it also costs money to do hosting and all that stuff for the website and the podcast, and then also have Sophia help me get all this stuff out, all this content, great content out to you guys. So like I said, really super happy that folks actually want to be supporters on Patreon. We really appreciate it. Make sure that you go to the website. You can order one of the Bus Only scarves, or you can be a patron and get one of the scarves as well. Patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We really appreciate it. Also, I don't mention this as much, but we did do an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. Get your hands on it by going to raymondunwin.com. You can actually download it as a podcast, which is really cool. It comes into as a podcast, and each chapter is an episode. So you can go and listen to the book. It's only about 7 hours, I think, which is pretty short for an audiobook, but also it was a short book at the time, but there's really some cool stuff in there, some history planning stuff that I think really makes sense and really resonates today. And it was a fun book to produce. And it's also the first one listed on the American Planning Association's 100 Essential Books of Planning. So check that out if you get a chance, raymondunwin.com. And finally, I'm also coming up with some shirt ideas. I got some shirt ideas, and I hope you guys like them when they come out. So we'll see what happens. But looking forward to sharing those with you when we get those too. I promise I'm not going to become a shop, but this is just like some fun stuff that I thought was be really fun to do and interesting. So we'll get those out when we do. Okay, listener questions and comments. This is the part of the show where we have people write in, and if you have a comment or a question, feel free to tweet at us or write us, or theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I don't think I got one this last time, but I appreciate your notes and your letters. I appreciate when you guys write below the LinkedIn page and those types of things. So really appreciate that and everybody's support for the show. Feel free to write in if you want to. I think Tracy and Chrissy are supposed to be here sometime in August. They've got busy schedules, and we're looking forward to having them on, hopefully in August at some point, so that you guys can write some stuff. So if there's something you want to ask and you want them to answer, feel free to write in at theoverheadwire@gmail.com, and I'll get them to give their opinions on the question. Okay, so puppies and butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. So my puppies and butterflies, I've been watching the Tour de France, which has been really interesting, but mostly I've been just hanging out with my newborn daughter. She's growing really fast, but she also makes me very tired as well, so tired. But it's been really fun watching her grow, and it's been really a great experience. One of the things that you learn is that sidewalks are not, they're not very flat when you roll a stroller over them. Or even a bassinet. So, it's interesting to see how the urban environment changes when you have a baby. So just lots of good vibes for that. And it's definitely a puppies and butterflies and babies, I guess, for that matter. So I'm sure I'll have more shows and other things to share in the future, but I just wanted to share that's been most of my focus the last month or so. All right. So you can find me online on Twitter at @theoverheadwire, at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring the podcast. Thank you for listening to this and Talking Headways. We really appreciate you all. I hope that you have a good time this week and next week, and we'll see you when we're back next time.
Talking Monday.